pleased to be joined by a colleague, an advocate, a colleague, Musa Mayer. Musa, you're a research advocate, you're an author, you're very well published going back many years, both on the scientific level as well as books to help patients coexist with their disease. Mm-hmm. Your real focus is on metastatic breast cancer. I know that you oversee the Advanced Breast Cancer Support and Information website for advancedbc.org. You're a very inspirational woman, and I'm very glad to be able to talk to you.
Thank you, Selma.
Tell me a bit more about you.
Well, I came to this work actually because I was interested in stories. My first breast cancer book was my own story, published way back in 1994. I'm a 22-year breast cancer survivor now. I became interested in helping other women tell their stories. And out of that effort, in the early years of internet online communities, I was able to gather the stories of women with metastatic breast cancer. And I've devoted really my work since that time to helping those voices be heard. I moved from helping women tell their stories to really being interested in drug development and emerging research that might help women with advanced disease live longer. And so that got me interested in regulatory processes, and many years I have worked with the FDA to be a part of the process that really helps decide whether a drug is advanced or not, and what our standards are, what our expectations are in terms of new treatments, what we're really willing to pay for, and what patients' interests really are. And I think it's my perception that we have set our sights too low, that we expect too little, and that we as advocates and patients aren't leading the process. We're being led by the process. And so I've tried to become as knowledgeable as I can about the science and the conduct of clinical trials so that I can be a voice, hopefully advancing higher standards and higher expectations.
If we're really going to advance molecular and targeted therapies, Musa, how do we foster an environment where patients see the opportunity to take their tissue and let them direct their tissue to researchers? Why is it fragmented? Why is it so territorial? Why are companies that fund research and develop drugs resistant to sharing tissue? Talk to us about that.
These are huge questions that really get to the basis of some of the fundamental issues in our system, and not only of delivery of health care, but of the education of patients, the involvement of patients with their own care. And I think the molecular and genomic understandings that are being developed at such a fantastic pace that we're hearing about at this conference are going to be for naught unless there is a way, a coordinated way, to make that information available to patients and doctors for the purposes of treatment planning and diagnosis. Otherwise, what's the point? So the question is, who is going to mediate that process? And I think it has to be the patient, because it's the patient's, in the patient's interest, more than anybody else. And we can, many of us, maybe not all of us, become experts in our own particular disease and our own care. I mean, the internet has fostered a whole generation of cancer patients who become as expert in some ways as the physicians that treat them, and who really do want to not only partner in their care, but in some important way direct it and and gather the experts to them who will help them to do that. It's a different paradigm than the one that we grew up with. And I can't say that the medical community has adjusted to it.
It's the only way we will be able to succeed with the potential of personalized medicine.
Yes, I agree completely.
A patient who wants to, let's say, get a second opinion at a cancer center is delayed up to 6 weeks because of the difficulty in getting your slides and imaging and
Yes.
records
Yes.
transferred.
Yes.
You have to have a slide review.
I agree.
And I am afraid that most patients don't even understand the importance of having their slides reviewed for that second opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we're all tired at the time of a diagnosis. It's overwhelming, and it's a job. But you know what? Being a cancer patient, for me, the first thing that one has to do, as emotional as it is, you got to move out of the emotional space and into the intelligent space, almost like a business.
Well, it helps you to cope, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, learning and understanding and beginning to move forward with something concrete you can do after feeling so helpless really helps patients to cope, no matter how difficult their prognosis really is.
And it begins with the business of gathering your data and getting those slides. The number of people who have, let's say, unknown primary. Walter Reed still, in addition to the NCI, Walter Reed will still take from civilians a very sophisticated laboratory, and where you can send your tissue for analysis when you have an unknown primary. I don't know if this is common knowledge.
It's not. I guarantee it's not. And what you're talking about really speaks to the predicament that people with unusual circumstances or rare cancers encounter all the time, which is simply a lack of knowledge among the providers. The system is really set up for the most common circumstances
Yes.
that cancer patients confront. And when you're outside of that, in a sense, you're really on your own unless you're fortunate enough to encounter a professional who knows how to help you navigate
Exactly.
that system.
And when you speak about rare cancers, and I'm convinced that within the common cancers
Yes.
are rooted deviations that are rare. And actually what we have are far more rare cancers that are blanketed under the common cancer,
Absolutely.
and they're not.
This is where we're going, this concept of orphan diseases. You know, the FDA has had a regulation that makes it easier for so-called orphan diseases, which have, I think, fewer than, is it 20,000 patients per year diagnosed, to advance the progress of their drug development. But in a certain sense, even the common cancers like breast cancer are becoming a collection of orphan diseases as they're subtyped. For example, triple-negative breast cancer, which is a kind of breast cancer which is essentially now described by what it isn't rather than what it is. That is, it's not hormone sensitive, it's not HER2 overexpressed. Now they think at least 7 different kinds of subtypes, which is why it's been so difficult to target treatments, because it's a set of subtypes within a subtype. And I think we're going to see that more and more. And it opens up real questions about drug development the concern is that drug development not become a series of sort of designer drugs that will be hugely expensive. As we know, some of the drugs already developed for rare cancers have become, and way out of the reach of most people. I don't know where this personalized medicine is really going with cancer care. Some people think that that problem will be solved by molecular subtypes across different cancers, having enough common patients for treatment. But I'm not totally convinced of that.
Well, and there will always be a cancer based on one's own unique biology.
Yes.
That is going to not be on the radar.
Right.
And will not be distinguishable to match a understood subset of, let's say, pathways.
That's only looking at the cancer itself and not the microenvironment, not the epigenetic influences.
Exactly.
You know, which we're learning are more and more critical to the development of cancer and may go a long way to explaining how different people with the same inherited makeup, some develop cancer, some do not, different exposures. We're still in the age of multiplying complexity, and there hasn't been much synthesis and clarity to come out of it yet. And I think we're going to be in real trouble going forward accessing the latest potential treatments in any kind of a meaningful, broad, societal way. I mean, I think there will always be educated patients with the resources to seek out the very, very best. But my question to you is, what about providing that level of care to everyone? That's my goal. And so I look at what's available today, and I think of how many lives could be saved if we were just using the treatments we had today. If, for example, life-saving hormonal treatment, anti-estrogen treatment in early breast cancer patients, the non-compliance rates with treatment are huge. They're, in some studies, approaching almost half of women who don't complete their treatment.
It's just so
We're not doing a very good job with what we know works, much less finding out what might work better.
When we only had therapies that required one to go to the doctor's office, so there was an infusion, it was quite different as well. Compliance and adherence as it relates to taking your oral therapy at home.
Is
Cost,
a whole other thing.
Cost, what happens if someone can't afford it, so then
Yes.
they try to reduce their dosage.
Yes.
Or if your therapy doesn't make you feel great and you decide, I'm going to skip it that day. And so the onus of treatment more and more falls on the patient to follow through.
Right. And if the supportive care being delivered to help people cope with the side effects is not really well done, that even adds to the problem. So, I mean, we know across the board that people who don't have the resources are skimping on life-saving drugs, not just cancer drugs, but drugs that, for example, prevent heart disease, hypertension. I mean, this is maybe even a larger problem in terms of sheer numbers. So I think about the incredible scientific advances that are being made, that we hear about at a conference like this one in San Antonio. But in the back of my mind is this larger question of how do we really deliver what we know works in an equitable way to everybody. This is so important, just so important.
Thank you for what you've done, and that you really had the courage and the heart and the capacity, because it takes a kind of commitment and intelligence to be able to take your life experience and use it in a transformative way, which you clearly have done. So I congratulate you as well.
Thank you.